Good morning. My name is Andrea Twist-Brooks, and along with Barbara Kern, who is seated in the back, I'm a co-director of the John Carrar Library here at the University of Chicago. I'm very pleased to see you all this morning and have such a wonderful turnout for our inaugural Kathleen Azar Symposium, Small-Scale, High-Impact Renovations, Redesigning Library Spaces on a Budget. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items, things that I know will get increasingly important as the day goes on. Restrooms are straight back through the reference area in the atrium near the stairwell. So at any time, if you need to make use of the facilities, please just leave by either the front or the back door. I also want to everybody's probably noticed this already, we have a lot of cordage taped down to the floor. There's a class that's running right now in this room on 3D and virtual anatomy. And the equipment was moved out just for us today. And so, but in order to make it as easy as possible for them to reset up on Sunday afternoon and in time for the class on Monday, we had to leave all of the cabling in place. So do be careful as you're walking around the room. We will be videotaping the sessions today, so if you're going to ask a question during the question and answer period, I know it's a little bit inconvenient, but if you could move to the front and use the microphone so that we capture your question as well as the speaker's answers, that would be terrific. We will have later on our lunch will not be in this room. It would be downstairs in our conference room. We will have be on hand to kind of guide people there, and it will be a buffet-style lunch. So poster presenters will give you some opportunity at the beginning of lunch to put up your posters, and then you'll be able to go and get in the buffet line and then have opportunity to have some lunch before you have to stand in front of your posters and present to the attendees here. So. We also will have tape and pins for you to put your posters up. Okay, well, that's it for housekeeping. I'd like to do a few acknowledgments and some background for the conference, and then we'll go on to our keynote speaker this morning. So, first of all, you are all seated in the Kathleen Azar room. This room is named after our former director and friend who was a guiding force for this library for many years, and so we were very pleased and fortunate to have her family, Howard Zar, her spouse, who's here with us this morning, her mother, Margaret Sikora, the Carrar Foundation, NSIT, which is our campus computing organization, and other friends who made contributions of various kinds to make this room possible. So it's been a wonderful space for us so far. We had a dedication last summer, so we haven't had it in place a terribly long time, but it's been well used in that time. It's been just one of the space redesigns or renovations that we've made in the library. You passed, perhaps you noticed a striking red wall as you were coming through the reference area. This is a brand new collaboration between campus computing and the library to bring public computing out of a sort of segregated laboratory space into an integrated library information space. And so this is something that we've been doing for just a few weeks now, where we also have, as part of this, a blended information desk. We have a reference librarian at one end of the desk and a computing assistant at the other end of the desk, and we're slowly working the kinks out of that. Although there haven't been too many, it's been a pretty good partnership without too many challenges. I also wanted to let you know that our director of the library, Judith Nadler, would have loved to have been with us today, but she had another meeting elsewhere that she could not get out of, but she does send her regards to the group, and she's very pleased at the level of attendance here. So, well, I think without... Oh, and the last thing I need to acknowledge is we did have a donation by Elsevier of a flash drive for every participant, and we will be loading slide files and some handouts and the roster of participants and some other materials on that, and you will be able to pick those up at the end of the day. Okay. All right. All right. I'm very pleased this morning to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker today is an architect and director of DEGW, an international design consultancy that integrates research, strategy, and design. She leads their learning environments practice in North America and for over 20 years has done planning for research libraries, including Johns Hopkins University, University of Virginia, Stanford, MIT, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She specializes in space strategies to support new ways of learning, organizational transformation, and knowledge sharing in research environments. Please join me in welcoming Shirley Dugdale, whose presentation is titled, Keeping an Eye on the Prize, Guiding Incremental Change Towards a Future Vision.
Good morning. Am I close enough to the mic? Is that okay in the back? A little closer. It's about as far as it's going to go, I think. Okay, just give me a heads up if I get out of range. When Andrea asked me to come and address you all, I started thinking about the topic that I might focus my remarks on, and I think really from our perspective and the kind of work we do, the important thing is really how do these incremental and small-scale changes happen within the context of a vision for the future of the library. So this is how I'm going to talk. It also reminded me of a quote that I heard about a decade ago from Nina Matheson, who used to be the preeminent medical librarian at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine Library, and in between the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. And next slide. Forward slide here. One back. What she said was, moving into the future is like riding a bicycle. You keep your eyes on what is ahead, not on the front wheel, and you can't go too slowly or you lose your balance. And that was very influential to me at that time, and it resonated again in thinking about this conference. Next slide. So what I'd like to do is to move the slides down, actually. We're losing the header up there. Is to talk about that there's really two levels, as I see it, for this strategy for incremental change. And then talk a little bit about how we go about, when we were working with libraries, go about thinking about developing a vision and the kind of process we go through. Then look at two case studies, one for the Alderman Library at the University of Virginia, and the other a case study from a different world, from the corporate world, at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation headquarters in Toronto, and make some connections there. So in terms of the thinking about strategy, really one is to make incremental changes that will be an expression of a vision, that you've done a vision study, you have a vision for 20 years out, and then you start to do pilot projects that implement pieces of that, and that experience then brings users more engaged in the process and validates the direction of the vision. The other is to think about working that vision out and using pilots and test facilities and small steps to really think through, learn from those experiences, and then clarify what kind of vision you're interested in planning for. Next slide. So when we start thinking about how to develop these visions, we're really dealing with a number of different processes, and I'll talk about 4 of them here. One is researching user needs. Another is thinking about alternative future scenarios, which helps you think through what possible things may happen in the surrounding context that you're working in. The third is thinking about new staff roles, the way technology is impacting the way you work and the services that you offer, and what new service models you might want. And then fourthly, looking at innovations in other fields and other areas for inspiration. And I know Chad has talked about that in the past, and it's very important to us all. So finally, thinking really is that success is really dependent, we feel, on user engagement, and that more input means that you will really reach a more effective solution. And that this process becomes very interactive, and it's very design thinking-like in the sense that it is iterative, that you are learning from the steps as you go through it, and that helps also to bring people along as a change management process. Next slide. Just to explain a little bit about DGW and our perspective on this, we are an international group. We are architects, but we also have a lot of other different types of disciplines in the firm. So we're very much conscious of the integration of research, strategy, and design, and how to engage that user research in the planning process both for workplace planning and for learning environments. And that we're also future-focused. How do we help and advise and facilitate groups to think about how technology is going to impact their future and how they want to change for that? We've developed an approach called a learning landscape approach in academic planning, looking at all the spectrum of learning spaces, not just the classrooms, but all of the informal learning spaces where learning occurs. And then also this issue of helping organizations change. And how do you get there? How do you create facilities that enable that? So next one. So with that context to what I'm talking about, although we are architects, we're really focused on this process. So I've mentioned the inclusive and exploratory process, very important to engage users in workshop kinds of activities. When doing these investigations, trying to keep it user-centric as opposed to library-centric and thinking in the traditional terms about how successful services are, but really engaging them with a mix of methodologies, both quantitative and qualitative, so the face time as well as the data gathering, hands-on as well as observational kinds of activities, and thinking about testing out solutions as well as defining needs. So next one. So some of the kinds of tools you can use that we have in our arsenal, mapping, a way people move through space and the way people use space during the day, tracking people's daily diaries of what they do, working with tools, one we call Jigsaw, and I'll show you an example of that later, where people can take pieces and work with them to express what they need. Defining work styles, looking at how work styles are being defined today and how people would like to change to become more mobile in their work patterns, etc. So, next one. But one of the ones that's quite interesting in planning for libraries is thinking about alternative futures. And scenario planning is a process that's been thought about a lot in the business world, really analyzing what the key drivers are that are likely to affect your future, what the key uncertainties might be, what are the predetermined elements that can't be changed and that are very likely. How do all these forces come together? And if you can identify those key drivers and then construct scenarios where these drivers intersect as to what that future might be like, this is a very helpful process to test out the waters and make sure that you are being as resilient as you can to adapt to many different kinds of situations that come in the future. Thinking about the staff roles and their needs is really a huge part of library planning. What we do is we think about the spatial implications of those changes, where certain areas are likely to shrink in terms of technical services moving from print to more digital resources, where areas are likely to expand, people dealing with metadata and other areas. Understanding new work patterns, how people work together differently, how can we co-locate people and get the adjacencies to work more effectively. And then using interactive tools to help people express what would be preferred patterns of the way they want to work. Thinking about new service models is also something that we find a lot in libraries now. This is an example, one out of a series of 3 different strategies we were looking at for one library. What is the right mix between staff workspace, behind the scenes, the primary service point, driven often by the presence near the front door, and then what is the spectrum of spaces in between to provide service. And there's a lot of librarians thinking now about the need to have mobile services and provided. And so thinking about the questions, testing it out, diagramming, all of these kinds of tools are helpful to think this through. And looking to insights from other fields, we find that the workplace planning we do informs the academic planning and vice versa, and that it's quite valuable. Thinking about insights from unexpected places, from restaurant design, from other types of environments can be very energizing. Like the Cox Computer Center at Emory was inspired by and engaged a restaurant designer. So all of these add input to creativity and thinking about space. You also have to think about the new patterns that you see emerging. And this example was from the British Library, where we've been working to help envision a new digital center to be built adjacent to the big center in London. And if you look and see what's happening there, they have put banquette seating and loose tables in their areas that are outside of the reading rooms, so they're outside the security envelope. And this has become a very vibrant place for people in London to come and work, and people come there for several hours, whether they're scholars or not, drop in, use the wireless system, connect with people, and it becomes a real work center for distributed work. So thinking about the library in the future as a meeting place is a very key thing in all our thinking. We also applied some of this thinking about distributed workplace to the work that we did with Johns Hopkins on their medical library master plan a few years back. They were convinced about the need to, as population coming to the library had been decreasing for years, that they had to reach out much more aggressively, and really became convinced that this model of the informationist was important, and they needed to be out working directly with the clinical teams and the research teams as much as possible. So this led to a space strategy where we were thinking about a model of touchdown suites that were embedded in the clinical and research areas, and that these suites, it was an opportunistic strategy in that they had libraries within departmental areas that were languishing because no one was ordering the print material anymore. And how could we combine that space opportunity there with the need for the librarians to connect more directly on one-on-one and small group work with teams and try and match that space strategy with their aspirations. Thinking about space strategy in general, I think is really a key part of all the planning that we need to do in terms of thinking about how these incremental changes might reinforce a strategy of seeking a more effective use of space over time. That diagram on the right was from a library where they were interested in looking at how they could provide more space at peak times, especially, and in the evenings as well, by enabling the conference space that was dedicated to staff to just be flipped and be able to be used by students and other users in the evening times, so that location of those, access to those all became important. Seeking shared use by multiple user groups, how can you get maximum use out of your space, and shifting the way space is allocated, going from thinking about space as being dedicated and individual and to more of a better ratio of group and shared. And that applies to both the user space in the library as well as to the staff space. So just to wrap up this thinking about process, I started thinking about trying to define what makes small-scale changes really transformative. And one is that I feel that they they stimulate a more effective integration of services that's aligned with the changing user needs, that they empower users to adapt the spaces to their own needs. They allow blended activities so that people can be doing multi-purpose activities at the same time, and that they provide a very vibrant destination that is much more effective at supporting the collaborative work that everyone needs to do today. And that they provide a much more meaningful way of creating a sense of community through the ownership of space, that people feel more vested and more comfortable in their spaces and more engaged. And that they promote enhanced well-being. People are very conscious today about a greener environment to work in, constantly commenting on the need for better daylighting, a more enjoyable, healthier environment. And then also that they move an organization closer to its future vision, so that there's a closer alignment with where you want to head in the future. So thinking a little bit about the case study for Alderman. Alderman was built in the 20s. It's their major library for the University of Virginia. It is a humanities and social sciences oriented library, but it is their flagship one. In the foreground here is a skylight down to the Special Collections Library, which is immediately adjacent, and also adjacent just off the screen is the 24-hour library, Clements Library, which is predominantly used, obviously, by the undergraduate population, does not have a large collection, but is more user-oriented space. So this facade shows you the main hall entry that I'll show you in a second. So some of the challenges, we worked on the master plan phase of it, and what I want to address is how some of the incremental changes that have been going on are fitting within that. Basically, Alderman had a lot of aging systems and infrastructure. They really were in a position where they have to start to invest money in a substantial way into their infrastructure, safety and accessibility problems, code-related things. But basically, they felt that there was not enough user space, and that they wanted a much clearer and more transparent organization of their services space, and converting existing spaces for the new functions that they found were growing very quickly that they had to accommodate. Some of the opportunities that we had is they had 2 existing light wells buried right smack in the center of the building, which was very helpful. They have wonderful historical spaces and reading rooms that are highly valued by their users, such as the one in the lower right, the McGregor Room, which has been beautifully renovated. They're also adjacent to these other libraries, so there's an opportunity to pull together this entire precinct. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So some of the visioning themes that came out of a lot of the workshops that we did together were thinking about this library as an intellectual crossroads. And it is really on the crossroads of the campus, and it is functioning today in that sense, especially reinforced by the cafe kind of activity at the entry, which we'll talk about. The importance of engaged neutrality as a place where many disciplines can come together and be brought together by the facilities and the services that the library offers. Sustaining the culture of digital scholarship. The library's had a history of providing incubator space to people who want to do new digital projects in support of digital humanities. And so they wanted to continue that tradition. Freeing up space for users, a major program to shift collections off-site. They have a wonderful retrieval system, their Leo system, which provides faculty with books to their office space, which enabled them to be able to much more easily move forward with this kind of strategy. Supporting the critical trends that they see coming, including more project-based collaborative activities and more digital making kinds of activities. Flexibility and adaptability and diversity, obviously. And this issue of looking at the combination of space, time, and the processes that are going on in it and integrating them more effectively. So through this, the intellectual crossroads concept, this is a shot of their main entry as they have it now, came together as a concept of a central atrium in the center of the building, and to draw all the different functions together. So to give you a feel for the layout of the building, Alderman is entered at the upper level, and it's built into a hillside, so it steps down. And today, in this zone here, they have a self-supporting stack block right smack in the center of the building. They had built another stack block later up against it, closing it off. And what we recommended was that they seriously consider removing that stack block because of code and safety related issues, rebuilding it with new slabs that would align with the other main floors and really fit it out as a with today's infrastructure to allow all the kinds of activities they wanted to expand into. And the second thing was enclosing these light wells to create an atrium and to make that atrium the center of the focus of all these activities. And this developed into a cascading approach to services that the everyday kinds of self-help activities would happen on the 4th floor at the main entry level. And then as you move down into the building, you would have increasingly specialized services. This would be a scholars lab, which I'll show you in a second, with GIS services and data services. And at the bottom level, the most specialized and most expert dealing with the more experimental kinds of functions. So looking at the building itself, the Alderman building is this footprint with the main entry here. This is the main entrance hall, and as you can see, it's really at the crossroads of the building itself as well as in the campus. And it's flanked by 2 large historic reading rooms to either side, one of which is a reference room. The other is their current scholars lab over here. And then this is the Clements building. There's a plaza that connects between them, which has the entry at the same level. So basically what we were doing was reinforcing this cafe activity at the center of the building, at the entry, thinking about these 2 flanking wings as being supportive of information communities, and I'll show you a little bit about what that means. And then how can we revitalize the 1st floor of Clements to be more up-to-date in what they wanted to try and achieve with collaborative work. So here's a shot of the library main entrance hall, Memorial Hall, and the cafe activity. They've recently renovated and expanded the seating. It's very popular, highly used at all times. People hold TA sessions there and consultations with students, and faculty meet. It's well used by many populations. They've introduced a international media stream wall at the back as well. And they've combined their service desks so that their reference and circulation are also happening in that space. And the entrance to the two flanking wings are at either end. So one of the side wings here is currently is the Scholars Lab. And there they introduce their GIS services, other data services. Students can go there, use large monitors and special software, and have consultation with librarians as needed for their work and their projects. That's been very successful. They're planning on moving that down to a level below so that they have more space to expand. This is a shot of the other reference room, which in its current original historical condition still has the old tables and had various awkward additions added to it, more shelving and that over time. But this will is envisioned as changing and becoming, the desire was to have it become much more responsive to user needs. And let's go on. So one of the things we did a lot of brainstorming about with the librarians was, well, what does that mean? You know, to have your collection be more agile and responsive. And one of the things that we developed was a concept of a more flexible alcove in that long, thin space, and that these alcoves could be defined various sizes depending upon the need. They could have a kit of parts that would have displays and other pieces. The concept being to allow a topic of current interest, such as Darfur, to become a reason to pull from the collections, make pieces in the collections more visible, and engage people in potentially in a dialogue about the issues. So trying to provide a mechanism to have physical expression to something that was articulated by the librarians. And over in Clements Library, the 24-hour library, this is the existing conditions. Power poles, a lot of computers, desktop computers that they had. And what they wanted to do, the impetus for the study, was to try and get user feedback on how well they could convert from the desktop units to predominantly laptop usage. And they got a lot of positive feedback from the students, and that with the confidence of that kind of research period, they went forward to rethink it. Some of the research they did involved brainstorming sessions with stickies, where the first round people threw out ideas and brainstorming on the yellows, and then went through, organized them, and then commented with the pink stickies. And there was sort of great disagreement. No, we don't want any TVs in here, and a lot of comments to that effect. They also asked the students to envision their library. How would they take that floor plate, and how would they lay it out, and got the input from various individuals that way. And so then they moved forward with the change to refurnish the space. They introduced a lot more power, and particularly around running off of columns, and that as best they could, given the concrete structure that they were limited by. They created small, semi-enclosed, low areas for teamwork. They have open workstations where it can be used by individuals or by small teams. The banquette seating along the window. They have also introduced a lot of flexible furnishings, so as they're not tied down by the desktop units, they allow the students to work with those layouts as they need to when they're studying at night. And then they've also introduced elements. The students were very interested in having a lot of plant material and good daylight and other things. And what they decided to do was to introduce some fish tanks. And those apparently have been very popular. The students really enjoy that. But looking to a more serene kind of environment at that end of the floor. Okay. So just looking back again at the plan, if we shift down a level, the level below that at Clements is a more of a media center where students can go and do projects, more pretty independent work with some consultation there. But the level below that is intended to be an expansion of their digital media lab, which is doing more experimental work in support of digital humanities work. So that would expand on that floor. And then if we create a connector to the main building, that will connect right into the Scholars Court, the base of the atrium, where the Digital Innovation Lab is going to be the incubator space for people who are doing special projects on a rotating basis, a cluster of meeting spaces as a conferencing center. And this will enable the flow between these groups of media and technology-related workers to be able to connect and work together more effectively. So then I'll show you a little bit about this atrium on the next slide. So the atrium basically is a 4-story space capped at the top. So you're entering really at this level here, and down, and that would be this gateway hub as we conceived of it, in the reading rooms that I described. And as you move down, it's getting more towards the Scholars Lab and the Scholarship Support Center for all kinds of faculty and graduate student support. And then down at the lower level, this innovation play zone with the incubator suites. And up at the very top, we had a graduate student scholarship center that would enable graduate students to come together in a workspace that would provide them places to meet and share experiences in doing their dissertations, provide them a home base with workstations and storage, and basically start to meet the needs of graduate students that currently have no home within the school, within the library building itself. And the other aspect is that to make all of the work and activity much more visible, both in the way it's handled architecturally and in the use of media, and to find ways to make that work. So just as a quick note about this innovation zone, the thinking being that it's one for real experimentation and hands-on work that could be a flexible space, programmed in a way that would allow it to change easily over time, not too chopped up with walls, but flexible in terms of layout, and that also that it might become a nexus for access grid type technology where people can come together and really communicate with remote teams in other places and be able to look at data and interpret information in new ways, assisted by the library staff. So then the last case study I just wanted to touch on a little bit is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And they are located, their headquarters is in Toronto. It's a fairly large building. It's about 10 stories. But the floor plate is quite dense and quite large with an interior atrium space to it. But because of the nature of the layout, this has really created a very internally fragmented culture. There's very little interaction between people in those various groups. And what they wanted to try and do was to implement changes that would allow the workspace to more effectively meet their programming and staff needs for the future, but at the same time using space in a much more effective way. So this diagram on the left represents their current sort of approach to their layout, much more walled communities working independently, very difficult in terms of orientation, finding your way through it. And what they wanted to migrate to was more of a concept of a city with dynamic neighborhoods that had a strong identity. You could clearly tell where you were in this fabric, but it also allowed the flow through and much better connections between groups. And they went through a whole user engaging kind of process to define these needs, and also they targeted areas for improvement, which were basically to improve community and communication. They wanted to increase user satisfaction. They wanted to raise aesthetic expression to another level. They had a lot of very gray offices and corridors, and they wanted to increase the flexibility and efficiency of the space. So one small-scale change that was recommended was to introduce what was called idea rooms. And the intent was to create rooms that were on the main edges of the atrium where people could find them very easily, that would become highly visible and areas to pull people together. They would have a small kitchenette associated with them. They would be enabled with whiteboards and technology to do good collaborative work. And these have proved to be very successful. They're booked on demand, and they have been a gesture to start bringing that split corporate culture together. Other prototypes that they're looking at are creating a prototype neighborhood which will demonstrate this more open way of planning, looking at the Workplace Design Lab as a place to help people test their ideas and think them through, and introducing a much more effective cafe to serve the building as a whole. So thinking about this, how do you create a neighborhood culture? One of the problems of the inefficient use of space was that it was both a contributor to and an outcome of the current conditions and the way the space was laid out. And right now, the space standards for the organization are driven on, as many in academic circles are, obviously, driven by the individual status and what kind of space allocation that they can get from that. And it involved a change of mindset, thinking about future space standards as being driven by the work group itself. And how can the work group become the determiners of how that space is allocated to fit their own work styles? So what we did was we developed a process for them that we call Sandbox. And this is a kit, and it's now a kit in a box, comes with all the pieces and the game boards, and it enables people to, as a group, start to design their own workspace. They are given a definition of what their allocation of space for their group is. They are then allowed to work with a kit of parts to determine how much they want to have as individual dedicated space, how much to be shared space. And one of the things that's very important as you move away from a model of dedicated enclosed offices to much more shared space is that you must provide a range of facilities to have it work well, not just a cube farm, but to move into a whole palette of smaller shared spaces, office spaces that can be booked on demand when you need to do private work and concentrate, and also thinking about the more inviting open workspace for ad hoc work. So this process then started to become one where people could express how they thought they would be working in the future and to try and work out together what different options they might have. It also became a leadership tool and allowed each group to reflect their program objectives more clearly to the organization. And so here are some images that just give you a feel for some of the kit of parts. We've also started working with a more diagrammatic kit of parts as well. We've used it a number of times in libraries very successfully, where it's really applicable to where you have a limited amount of space and you have to work within those walls to engage the users in envisioning. And so just to wrap up here, thinking about how do we develop strategies that maximize the transformational value of those incremental changes, that these are the kinds of things that have emerged out of our work, thinking about it as a very inclusive and exploratory process, the need to develop a vision that provides your framework for the future as to what you're trying to achieve, exploit the opportunities to partnership, to offer enriched services, and thinking about planning for blended activities. We see that in all aspects of the work we do now, that's what people are really seeking to be able to do. Shifting space allocation from the individual and dedicated to the collaborative and shared. Again, a lot of potential to transform organizations in this thinking. Designing to create a very vibrant and energizing destination, largely driven by how you pull together and amass different types of facilities to give them that energy, how they're located in relation to other clusters of activities. And that gives the enlivening aspects similar to a great city. And then the other aspect to that is that with the mobile technologies, people are able to vote with their feet. They're tending to gravitate to the environments where they're really comfortable working, and you need to think about the design and the ambiance of those spaces. And supporting distributed work patterns and mobility. This affects all of us, students, everyone, and is becoming a big part of planning for tomorrow. And then also, lastly, which I have always felt is really important, is thinking about libraries as innovation labs. And how can we use these incremental spaces to be testing out for the future and making it visible to everyone, your administration, your leadership, so that they understand the value that libraries can really bring in the future to the academic world. So, thank you.
We do have time for questions, so if there are questions.
Yes.
Do you need me to come up or not?
Yeah.
Would you?
I'm from a large urban public institution, which is what prompts my question. Do you find when you're doing this kind of planning that you have to take a different approach for a library that's closed to students than for one that's open to the public in general?
That's
Yeah.
closed to students.
I mean, just to students.
Just serving
You know what I
students.
mean? Like
Yes.
here versus...
No, I think that, we do work for advising many different types of institutions and situations. So I think they have their own sets of determinants.
Uh-huh.
I think a public institution clearly has to deal with all of the demands of the night traffic, the added level of services, and it is a different situation. But we do work with community colleges, with many different types of libraries, and you need to understand fully what the different demands are on the different types of libraries. So, but we can talk more about that in more detail later. So.
Other questions? Comments?
It's a somewhat trivial question, but when you were talking about the CBC building, the IDEA rooms, IDEA was in all caps. Is that an acronym of some sort?
I don't think so.
Okay,
It's
I was just curious.
like
I said, a somewhat trivial question.
It's a good question. That's a good question. I can find out, but I don't think so. No, I think it was just to give it emphasis as a concept to the people they were dealing with. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much. I'd be happy to talk with you all later when we have an opportunity to. So.